Galion City Council meeting to order via Zoom. We'll stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have a moment of silence, please. Please be seated. Now I have roll call council members.
Mr. Baldinger, unmute yourself. Oh. Trying to get him unmuted, sorry. Okay. Mr. Baldinger. Mr. Baldinger. Okay. Mr. Bodkins.
Here.
Ms. Earlston.
Here.
Dr. Fellner.
Here.
Mr. Ivy.
Here.
Mr. Richard.
Here.
Mr. Triplett.
Here.
All 7 council members present. Next roll call, elected official Safety Service Director.
Mayor O'Leary.
Here.
Auditor Trish.
Here.
Director of Law Palmer.
Here.
Treasurer Sparks. Oh, he's muted. Hold on.
Hi.
Treasurer Sparks.
Here.
Safety Service Director Ward.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Recognition of department heads, I would imagine I see Health Department Trace Factors here and Huckleberry, Communication Director. Don't see him, but I'm sure
You got, yeah. You got Matt is here, and you've got Phil Jackson.
Okay, Phil Jackson. Is that it?
Yep.
Let's see. Okay, approval of the minutes of the May 12th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the May 12th, 2020 regular meeting.
Okay, Mr. Boldinger made the motion, seconded by
I'll second that, Carl.
Mr. Richardson, seconded it. Any additions or corrections? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, the minutes of the May 12th meeting hereby approved as presented. We have one ordinance that needs to be added to the agenda. It was discussed, but I guess there wasn't an amount in it. So it's ordinance 2020-37. Do I hear a motion to add that to the agenda?
This is Ivy. I'll make a motion to add ordinance 2020-37 to tonight's agenda.
Okay.
And Tammy Earlston, I'll second that.
Second by Ms. Earlston. Roll call.
Mr. Baldinger.
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins.
Yes.
Ms. Earlston.
Yes.
Dr. Fellner.
Yes.
Mr. Ivy.
Yes.
Mr. Richard.
Yes.
Mr. Triplett.
Yes.
Okay, passed by 7-0 vote. We did have on the agenda a resolution, but Mr. Trish called today and said didn't have quite all the figures, and we did need to add that to the agenda. It would be brought up at the next meeting. So at this point, then, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Okay, Mr. Triplett made the motion, seconded by
I'll second
Mr. Richard, seconded.
Richard.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, likewise. The agenda is approved as amended. Okay, moving on. Legislation. The first one is ordinance 2020-29. That's the third reading.
25, right? Is that what you said?
I didn't know, but it is 25.
Okay.
Okay.
Ordinance number 2020-25, entitled ordinance repealing ordinance 2020-15, and to now adopt a credit card policy for the city of Galion.
Okay, we heard the reading of the ordinance. It is the third reading. Open up for discussion. Who wants to start?
Are we gonna set a limit on these cards?
Who wants to address that? Brian or Eunice?
The limit would be set, this is Brian, the limit would be set by the department and those that would be there also by the bank, so, and the card itself, so yes. But council would not. We will inform council of what those limits are.
Other questions?
I'm going to reference Mr. Sparks' final statement last council meeting. I think he was not based on this particular ordinance being discussed, but one of his last statements as treasurer report. He was on council when the last credit card improprieties took place, and he recalls just receiving typewritten, hand-generated statements. This is a whole different ballgame. I believe council will have excellent oversight, and we can make a reversal on the policy. And I move to bring ordinance 2020-25 to the final reading and for passage.
It's a
Mr.
third.
President,
It is a third reading.
Yes.
before you do that, I would just mention that if council is inclined to pass this tonight, and if and only if that is the case, there is a recommended change which you have in front of you as Exhibit C, which is the inclusion of a compliance officer language, and you do have it in your packet. So the issue with that is that if you're going to pass this, the way it is currently worded, it does not call for a compliance officer, and yet if the auditor does not have custody and control of the cards, there has to be a compliance officer appointed. Now, I will tell you, the city doesn't have to do this, but if you're going to do this and are inclined to do so, you really should add that compliance officer language via amendment.
Mr. Palmer, I thought it was my understanding that there was a compliance officer written in the language previously.
There
Is
is
that a misunderstanding?
in the current ordinance which council passed, and there is not compliance officer language in the proposed revision, the first, which you have there is Exhibit B. It would be the third one you have there, which you will see does include language about a compliance officer in Section 4, and it is actually in bold and italics.
Mr. Richard?
Yes, Mr. President. Members, just to remind you a little bit, we originally passed ordinance 2020-15 with a credit limit of $5,000. Subsequently, we were advised that that would be a problem. I still have some questions about that issue. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not comfortable with an open-ended entry or section that essentially is whoever it happens to be, the auditor makes the total up for that card. Some banks have limits, some banks don't have limits, especially when it comes to government issues. So the question would arise is, and I'm saying anything bad about anybody particularly, but this is something that whether or not we actually go forward and end up having credit cards issued out, this is something we should have in our ordinances as a matter of good business practice. again, my only concern, or one of my concerns, is the fact that we had originally passed this with that limit on there, and now we aren't going to have any limit on there, which is basically an open-ended issue. So do we really want to do that?
And just said they were going to have limits that was going to be, but that council couldn't place the limits on it. The banks and the people that are going to be using, so there are going to be limits to it. I can't say what those limits are.
Before we go any further, I think Dr. Stoner, didn't you back a while ago before made a motion to move it to the final reading?
Well, I didn't realize that we were going to be required to amend it, so I will
Withdraw that?
remove my motion.
Okay, thank you. Now we're legal. Go ahead, Mrs. Earlston.
Yeah, it was my understanding that there was going to be limits on each department. Instead of just a $5,000 credit limit on the card, there was going to be a limit for each department. And so again, correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly that council would, I don't know, approve that or have knowledge of what the limit was per department. And Brian, am I understanding correctly about that?
Yes.
And so we would actually have a say, or at least would know what the limit is.
You would know what those limits are, and the reason we're somewhat hesitant on those is we've really not looked at what each department would need to be practical.
And it's also my understanding that this could actually save the city some money, because by using the city credit card when, for example, if a department is going to training and they're getting hotel rooms, which, sometimes they may need 3 or 4, it can run in, $1,000, or, they can actually do that as a tax write-off, where if it's charged to somebody's personal credit card, we're paying the taxes on that. Am I also understanding that correctly?
There's always the question of how to handle the tax liability on that when it's on a personal card, yes.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I hesitate to weigh in, but I'm going to go anyways. Now, what is this about? Who's setting these limits? Who's going to set these limits? And then who is going to be the compliance officer?
Who has
So-
that?
Well, that would be Brian, I think that's who I asked the question of.
Yes, I'm coming in there. Yes, the compliance officer would be named by the auditor, and the limits would be set after the auditor and compliance officer and probably the department heads meet to see where we need to be.
So well, anyways, go ahead, Mr. Palmer, and say what we're going to say.
I don't want to cut you, Mayor, go ahead.
No, man, tell him that, just say the fact of the matter.
Can I say
Not how the compliance officer works.
The proposed ordinance language that you have in front of you, the proposed amendment, it is council that would choose the compliance officer, not the auditor. So obviously council can, you don't need to amend the amendment, but when you do make the amendment, if you do choose to do that, you can put in whoever you want there to make that choice. But currently as it's worded, the proposal is for council to choose a compliance officer. That would not be done at the time that you create the credit card policy. That would be something that council would do in a future vote.
Mr. Palmer, is that consistent with the state auditor circular that they recommend that the council picks that?
The reason I believe it is consistent, Mr. Mayor, is that Galion doesn't need to have a compliance officer to begin with. Compliance officers are required in cities where you are able to have a mayor's court.
Yeah.
Galion doesn't have that. So there's no statutory requirement we have a compliance officer. The issue is that as it's currently constructed, the credit card policy that was presented to me and that you have before you actually has does not have the auditor having care and custody of all the cards. The auditor would be giving individual cards to department heads. If that's the case, you need a compliance officer, but the ORC does not specify in that instance how that compliance officer is chosen. So it would
Does it
have
exclude anyone?
no,
Does it exclude anyone from that chain?
Not practically, but it is absolutely consistent with the rest. It should not be the auditor or the treasurer.
An auditor or an auditor staff?
It doesn't
That's what-
say.
That's what it says.
It doesn't say they
It says.
can't be.
So Thomas, could we just make an amendment to it to add a compliance officer to what we have before us tonight?
Yeah, that's what that language is there for you, Tammy,
Okay.
is to add that compliance officer. And again, that would be one the council would choose. You could change that to make it the auditor. You could change it to make it the mayor. I will say that if this were a situation where Galion was required to have a compliance officer under the Ohio Revised Code, the mayor is the person that chooses the compliance officer, not the auditor.
Thank you, Thomas. That is the point I was making. And I do realize it only applies if we had a mayor's court. But the rest of the statute is mute about the compliance officer.
Absolutely correct. Tom's correct. But if you're going to go consistent with the Ohio Revised Code, you might consider changing that language to have the mayor appoint the compliance officer, which would be easy to do. Just change the language you've got in front of you. The proposed amendment to read, instead of council, just put the mayor.
So why is it that council does not choose the compliance officer? That's not with Ohio Revised Code? Is that what you're saying, that the council cannot choose the?
What I'm saying, Mrs. Earlston, is that when compliance officers are required under the code, the mayor chooses the compliance officer. In situations where we're having, this isn't, a compliance officer is not required because we do not have a mayor's court, but we can choose voluntarily to have one. In that instance, we can set it up the way we would like to set it up.
Mr.
So
Richard?
if we chose not to have a compliance officer, then Mr. Trish would oversee.
If you don't have a compliance officer, then we need to change the language of the credit card policy so that Brian has custody and control of all the cards and not department heads.
Mr. Richard?
Mr. President, members, two things. One is we actually do have a credit card policy in place. We passed ordinance 2020-15, which is exactly this. Well, except for the mentioned changes that Mr. Palmer has already said, everything else is the same. My only concern is we're still discussing issues on this repeal ordinance. And I'm beginning, since we had a long discussion last council and the council before that, I'm kind of towards possibly sending this back and having it re-looked at. Again, the reason why I say that is because technically we do have a credit card policy in place. The main issue was the amount in there. But real quick, the question I had too was for Mr. Trish. Brian, do we currently have credit cards of any kind?
We have charge accounts, for example, but not a specific credit card in the traditional sense, no.
So we technically don't have any credit cards right now.
It's unclear if Lowe's is a credit card under the law or not. Mr. Palmer's going to have to help me on that one.
Okay. But again, so this would be, what we're talking about is future opportunities, so to speak. So again, and I'm just throwing this out there as a matter of discussion. Technically, we do have a policy in place. There is a limit on that for $5, excuse me, this current ordinance, which would be repealing the former, back, and let's take another look at it real quick.
Eunice, I think you had your hand up to request to speak.
Mr. Triplett had his up before me.
Okay, Thomas,
Okay,
I'm looking at the thing from Mr. Yost.
Yes,
In a compliance officer model, says the use of a credit card account for expenses beyond those authorized by legislative authority constitutes misuse of a credit card account. So that tells me that we set the limits on those cards.
I would agree with you. If there is a limit set, yes, that would apply. If there's no limit set, obviously you cannot exceed it.
Thank you. So basically what we have here is a conglomeration. I mean, you don't have to have either or, custody or control or compliance.
I'm telling you that this is a very convoluted, the bulletin from the auditor's office attempts to make it very clear for specific types of communities. For Galion's purposes, what the auditor's office asked for is sort of like both of them. They, you know, it could be the case here that we would just have Brian have care and custody of all the cards, control of all the cards. And in that case, you know, people who wanted to use a card would check one out from Brian. It would be available to them to use for the specific time frame necessary for that card to be used for that purchase. But what the auditor's office wanted to do was actually distribute cards to department heads. That's what triggers this independent need for a compliance officer, where we don't need one otherwise under the Ohio Revised Code.
okay.
I know that's clear as mud because that's exactly what it is.
Now, Eunice,
My concern from my job and what I do, regardless of what kind of credit card, if you want a credit card, if you don't want a credit card, whatever. To address Mr. Richard, the current policy, if I had to lock the Lowe's card down because it is over $5,000. So we would be in violation with the policy that is currently in place with that limit. My other concern becomes that this is done up to address charge accounts and everything. I fill out credit applications definitely monthly, sometimes weekly, and they often ask for credit limits on those accounts. We've always set those based on what the needs are of the department. Council has never reviewed those. They set the budget with their level of authority, and the departments still have to live within that budget, no matter what the limit is on whether it's a credit card or a charge account or anything. But this policy also addresses those. And I don't, if that's all to be set by council, then you guys are going to have to review every credit application. This is a question. If you're setting those limits, and I mean, I get them some days and the department heads need them turned around right away. So I'm not sure how the city would handle that if council's setting the limits.
Mr. Richard,
Mr. President, members, Eunice, I'm confused now. So you're saying that while this is designed for a credit card policy, this is now melded into open accounts?
It has always said credit card or charge accounts.
Excuse me. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the policy that was drafted has always said credit card or charge account. When we go through our audit, like with Perry and Associates, they have been asking us if we have a policy for that.
In the policy, excuse me, this is Fellner, the policy units that we passed were already in violation because we set the limits, correct? That 2020-15 that we're trying to repeal now, we're already, according to you, already in violation of that that limit, or you had to lock down Lowe's because we already were exceeding that limit. Is that correct?
In my opinion, that might be a question more for Thomas, but yes, the Lowe's alone was $7,500 limit for what could be charged there.
But according to the state auditor, the legislative authority sets the limit. So I don't know who's confused.
If that's how it's to be done, then that's fine. We just need to know and set up the procedure. I'm just stating what I found out from my research.
Dr. Fellner?
Oh, no, I was just answering Mr. Triplett as to who was confused.
Oh, okay.
Me too.
Well,
What committee did this come out of? Did it come out of finance?
I believe it did.
I don't recall. It's been so long.
I
Yeah.
believe the original out of finance.
I'm pretty sure it was finance.
Came out of finance and was amended on the floor to change the limit to the $5,000. That's been 6 weeks ago.
Longer than that.
Yeah, longer than that.
We were still meeting in chambers.
Yeah, it was the
Right.
last meeting in chambers, the last meeting in March, or no,
March.
yeah, last meeting in March.
Other questions?
Are we going to throw this back in committee or are we going to vote on it? There's no sense in setting here.
It's a third reading, get, one way or the other.
My question would just be to the law director from my what I do. Do we repeal this and not put anything in place right now? Or because what's in place isn't good? I know that you had made a remark that when it's repealed, it repeals it back to the passage date. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
We sure had a lot of discussion on this. I don't know if we got to send it back to committee. Where do we go from there? Or is it prudent to either pass it or turn it on tonight? What's your thoughts?
I make a motion, we put a pass on it.
What does
Put a
that
vote
mean?
on it.
What does a pass mean?
I mean a vote, sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
I second that motion.
Okay, we got a motion by Mr. Triple, a second by Dr. Fellner to vote on it. And Julie, you had a question?
Don't we need to amend it, Thomas?
Yeah, you need to amend it, and if you're going to pass it or vote on it. But the other thing is, you really can't be a motion to vote. It needs to be a motion to approve or to not
Okay, well,
approve.
since we have to amend it first, then those didn't count.
I'll take it back.
Okay,
Okay. You retract your second too, Dr. Fellner?
I make a motion to amend ordinance 2020-25 to include the compliance officer language and exhibit, is it B, Mr. Palmer?
C.
In
C.
exhibit
C.
C,
C is in cat.
which I don't have tonight.
I know.
None of us.
To exhibit C, and also change the language instead of council for the nomination of compliance officer, change it to mayor.
Okay, okay.
You heard the motion by Dr. Fellner. Do we have a second?
I will second the motion.
Okay, Mr. Ivy seconded it. Further discussion? If not, roll call on the amendment.
Comfortable voting on something we don't, none of us has Exhibit C. None of us can see the language that's in Exhibit C, and I do not feel comfortable in that vote.
It was in the packet.
Yeah.
If
Not in
the packet's in there.
all I got is B.
It's behind it. It's behind proposed changes to the credit card policy. Gail,
Yeah, just man, I'm looking.
It's not.
It
labeled.
looks like, if I may, it looks like page 16 of 60.
Tina, 60.
16, like sweet 16.
Yeah. Oh,
Do the rest of you have that in your packets? See someone shaking yes. You find it yet, Gail?
okay, this is it. It's not titled Exhibit C. That's what was.
Correct.
Okay. we
it's all
got-
proposed changes,
yeah, right.
Thomas.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, now roll call on the amendment.
Okay. Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy. You're muted.
Yes, yes,
Okay. Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
No.
Mr. Baldinger,
No.
Mr. Bodkins,
No.
Ms. Earlston.
Yes.
Okay, takes, law director took a simple vote 4-3, right?
Correct. It passed.
The amendment
Yeah.
has passed at 4-3.
Yep.
That's the
That's
amendment.
just, that's just the amendment, yeah.
Okay, now discussion on the,
I make a motion to approve the amended ordinance 2020-25.
for the motion by Dr. Fellner. Do we have a second?
I will second. Ivy?
Mr. Ivy seconded. Okay, discussion. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes,
Mr. Richard,
No.
Mr. Triplett,
No.
Mr. Baldinger,
No.
Mr. Bodkins,
No.
Ms. Earlston.
Yes.
Okay, the motion went down 4-3.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay. Moving on to ordinance 2020-32. It's the first reading.
Let me get there. Ordinance number 2020-32, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum aggregate principal amount of $2,510,390 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the costs of A, improving the city's sewer treatment plant by acquiring screw pump equipment together with all necessary appurtenances thereto. B, improving and upgrading the city's electric distribution system by replacing lines, poles, conductors, insulators, transformers, and other auxiliary equipment together with all necessary appurtenances thereto. C, improving and upgrading Portland Way North between certain termini by replacing roadway and sanitary sewers together with all necessary appurtenances thereto. D, improving the city's sanitary sewer system by constructing a lift station along State Route 61, together with related site improvements and all necessary appurtenances thereto. And E, improving various public infrastructure improvements within and serving the Brant Road area, including but not limited to the design and construction of approximately 1,000 lineal feet of new roadway between State Route 598 and Keller Drive, the widening of approximately 925 lineal feet of roadway along State Route 598, including the design and construction of a turn lane and construction of the necessary stormwater drainage systems for the property, together with all incidental work and related appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Heard the read of the orders 2020-32. Open up for discussion. Who wants to address this? Brian, the mayor, or who?
I'll start on this, but it did come through the finance committee. This is the annual borrowing that we do for the debt. In that packet, you'll also see what we're paying down on the debt. This is the band or bond anticipation notes that we've done every year on that. I believe it came through a committee and was approved unanimously.
Good. Gail, add anything to that?
This is Fellner. Yes, this did come through committee. And I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules and proceed to the final reading on ordinance 2020-32.
Heard the motion by Dr. Feldner to suspend the rules on 2020-32. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Carl.
Seconded. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston. You're muted. Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Okay, passed 7-0. Now the ordinance, discussion on the ordinance.
I'd like to make a motion to pass ordinance 2020-32.
Heard the motion by Dr. Feldner. We have a second.
Watkins, second.
Okay, Ms. Bodkin seconded it. Discussion. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger.
Yes.
The ordinance passed by a 7-0 vote. Moving on to ordinance 2020-36 as a first reading.
What about 35?
35. Okay, skip
Yep.
one. Pardon me.
Ordinance number 2020-35, entitled ordinance adopting an amended agreement between the City of Galion and the Galion Port Authority for a loan program and authorizing the Safety Service Director to sign same and declaring an emergency.
Okay, discussion on this ordinance.
I will jump in by saying, if I might, Mr. President, by updating, if I might, I don't know if I was muted or not, I apologize. There's been a lot of work done since the last meeting. And why we need to come back is there have been some changes. And I'll really think it's better maybe for the law director to outline those or have some questions. But the summary is that the Port Authority has approved the agreement and are ready to administer the program and get it going. So it's a little bit like ratifying a contract, another, a union contract, something. They've ratified it. Now it comes back to us to approve. And then the money can be transferred to the port. And by then they'll have all of their paperwork and procedures in place.
Law Director Palmer.
Yes, what the mayor says is absolutely correct. There was a lot of give and take back and forth between David Rogers, who's the attorney for the Port Authority, and my office. What you see basically on page 2 of the agreement with the Port Authority is mostly new language. not all of it, but it's mostly new language that was added. I did want to address one issue that Dr. Fellner had raised at the last committee meeting that this was discussed at, and that was he brought up a question of if the city is going to do collections effort, if any of these loans do happen to go into a defaulted status, how is the city going to legally do that? And Dr. Fellner, Mr. Rogers and I have cleared that up. What's going to happen is we're going to enter into a subsequent later agreement in case, let's hope that none of them are defaulted. But in case that would be the situation, the city and the Port Authority is going to enter into a subsequent agreement, and we're going to agree that they're going to be doing a blanket assignment of all the money that's owed to them back to the city so that we can proceed with any collection efforts if that's something we choose to do. Nevertheless, I think this is a great agreement, guys and ladies. This is something that is a fantastic idea. And as I said before, a lot of give and take. Port Authority stepping up to the plate and willing to do this. And if you have any questions on it, let me know.
So, Mr. Palmer, other than the collection of a defaulted loan, this language is essentially the same as we discussed in the committee the other night?
It's exactly the same.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
I would like to make a motion to proceed to the final reading, suspending the rules on ordinance 2020-35.
Second.
Motion by Dr. Fellner to suspend the rules. And who seconded?
Triplett.
Second.
Mr. Triplett seconded. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Richard.
Yes.
Okay, the suspend the rules passed by 7-0 vote. Now discussion on the ordinance.
I'd like to make a motion to pass ordinance 2020-35.
For the motion by Dr. Fellner, do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second. Yep.
Who seconded? Mr. Triplett?
Triplet.
Triplett seconded. Discussion. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Richard.
Yes.
Okay, the ordinance passed by 7-0 vote. Now moving on to ordinance 2020-36. First reading.
Ordinance number 2020-36, entitled ordinance approving the final resolution from the Ohio Department of Transportation for PID number 103703 and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement between the City of Galion and ODOT for the Harding Way urban paving project and declaring an emergency.
Read the reading of the ordinance. Discussion. Going through a committee.
This is, yeah, I believe this is coming through finance, and I think this is the Harding Way project, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Anything further on that?
The only thing I'd say that's new is a little bit, the final estimate, the engineer's estimates, looks like it's a little bit lower in terms of our contribution. So let's hope the bid, the bids come in and around that estimate.
Anybody else have a question on this?
I'd like to make a motion to proceed to the final reading by suspending the rules on ordinance 2020-36.
Heard the motion by Dr. Fellner to suspend the rules. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Richard. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy.
Yes.
Okay, suspend the rules, passed by 7-0 vote. Now discussion on the ordinance.
I'd like to make a motion to pass ordinance 2020-36.
Motion by Mr. Triplett, second.
Second. Bodkin, second.
Mr. Bodkin, seconded. Discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger.
Yes.
The ordinance passed 7-0 vote. And moving on to ordinance 2020-37, this first reading also.
Ordinance number 2020-37, entitled ordinance authorizing the fire chief and/or safety service director to apply for a grant from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, under the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant Program in the amount of, oh crap. In the amount of, I've got it on. I sent you guys out the new one and I forgot to put the new one in my thing. Hold on. 700 and, hold on. Sorry. How much was it, Phil? I can't, my paper's cut off.
$712,062.36.
Okay.
Is that the end of the reading of it?
Julie, gonna finish that?
Finish with that?
And declaring an emergency.
I'm declaring emergency, sorry.
No, that's fine. You gotta do it.
Sorry.
Okay. Discussion on this. We have Chief Jackson here too. You want to take it?
I'd be glad to. Safer grant is a division of the FEMA grant. We've always applied for equipment, trucks, things like that, and been pretty successful with that, as well as fire prevention and safety. This is the third leg of it, Safer, which stands, like Julie said, for basically a staffing grant for fire departments. Typically, it has a cost share of you receive 75% of an employee's benefits and wage package for the first 2 years, and then you receive 35% of it in the third year. Well, being the COVID crisis as well as the economy, the federal government has released all of those cost shares, so it's a 100% grant. There's no cost share locally for us to be able to employ additional firefighters. And why this is important, and really why it works perfectly now, is currently I'm sitting with 3 people by time this, if we were awarded this grant, that are set to retire within the first year of this grant, and an additional 3 or 4 by the ending of this grant. So it would be a perfect way to staff, get some stuff done we can't typically do. And then our succession planning is really in place for those people. The federal government no longer requires you to keep the staff after the 3 years. And that's a discussion for council at that point. The other part is the rest of the county is what I would call in flux with the response for the rest of the county that's not Galion and Polk Township. For instance, the Joint Ambulance District, which is now Portsmouth, the Cyrus Fire, as you've probably read in the paper, looking to do Safer so they can maybe take that over. You have a lot of townships out there that may need our service, and this would poise us better to be able to assist them and deliver our service to them. I just looked, as we were talking earlier about the credit card thing, I was curious to know how far Hammond was from our station versus the Cyrus, which is responding to them. Beardsley and Hammond are 2 miles from our station and 13.7 from the Cyrus station where we're getting response currently. So I think we've got an argument when something changes there throughout the county that we could better serve those people, as well as the golf course and all those. We're sitting here ready. So,
any questions of Chief Jackson or anybody else?
There's a either you or Ms. Ward have to sign something by tomorrow, correct?
Correct. They extended the deadline from last week till tomorrow at 5 p.m. The grant is done, waiting on the approval tonight for this vote. We finished it earlier this morning, 37 pages worth. We did it in record time, but credit Eunice and April and Nikki and all those guys that helped me get through that. So yeah, it's set. It's 150,000 and some change for salary, and 86,000 for benefits per year for those 3 employees, and that's where you get you add that up for 3 years, and how you get to 712,000.
Funding at 100% makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it? And any further discussion?
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules and proceed to the final reading on ordinance 2020-37.
Read the motion.
Baldinger, second.
Mr. Baldinger, second the motion. Roll call.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Mr. Triplett.
Yes.
Okay, that passed by 7-0 vote also. Moving on to other businesses, we're still going to continue having.
Don't
That
we
was
have
only
to make
to
a
suspend the
motion to
rules.
pass?
Excuse me, yeah, right. Okay, back to the ordinance, original ordinance, not
I'll make
original.
a motion to pass ordinance 2020-37.
Mr. Triplett made the motion. Do we have a
I'll
second?
second. Ivy?
Ivy seconded. Discussion? If none, roll call.
Mr. Triplett,
Yes.
Mr. Ivy,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinger,
Yes.
Mr. Bodkins,
Yes.
Ms. Earlston,
Yes.
Dr. Fellner,
Yes.
Mr. Richard.
Yes.
Okay, now moving on to other business. We still going to have the 2 committee meetings next month, finance and police, fire and health, or not? What's
As
your,
far as I know, I have all models like suspended on this system, so they don't send them out until we figure out what
Mr.
we're
Chairman,
doing. Trish is on here. I don't know if she can
anything
knows
else?
when we're gonna have to quit wearing masks and everything. So
I don't see that lightening up anytime soon, and we should be hearing a little bit more soon in terms of gathering restriction limits. Right now, it still sits at 10 though.
okay. So
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Don't shoot the messenger.
I know.
Yes.
This is Brian Trish. I would strongly recommend that the finance committee meet next month.
Right. And the others you would call if needed, okay?
Yeah.
That'd be the 3rd Wednesday of June, okay?
Yes, sir.
I think if I might, Mr. President, ask Mark and the utility committee to consider setting something up. We've got some information back on the water fund and kind of adjustments that we're looking at. Real similar situation with the sewer fund, although the negative cash flow is great. So it might make sense to have a discussion within utilities to talk about rate sufficiency and stuff like that in water and sewer. But that's, you know,
June 2nd, next week.
If that's Wednesday, that's fine.
All
It
right,
would normally June 3rd, right?
Yes.
okay,
yeah.
okay, those 2 in the play by ear on the others. Anybody else have anything on other discussion? I know there's on the agenda, health department funding discussion. Mrs. Earlston, would you like to take that?
Yes, that came through the police, fire and health department. And basically, and I'll let Trish help me out with this a little bit. The health department has now received some additional funding through the state that also can help them with the tracing. And that is the money that we appointed to them at the last meeting. So they just want to kind of be very transparent and very above board and come back to council and let them know about some of the things that they would be using that $40,000 for, in addition to what the state has given them. Is that kind of put it in a nutshell, Trish, would you say?
Yeah, there's a grant that we can write. We are capped currently on the amount that we can receive for contact tracing specifically, and just contact tracing. So just once somebody's identified as being a contact, and getting a hold of them and monitoring them, which I think I've kind of presented a few different times in terms of contact tracing for us, and in many of our discussions, is more than just that aspect of it. It's finding the actual cases, the reporting of them, the 24/7 reporting, and handling the full caseload as well. But again, one of the aspects of this response that is a bit more time consuming and costly for us right now is enforcement. And I use enforcement as a rather big, broad term because most of our enforcement is education. It's just people have questions and we have to stay on top of it and take the time to answer it. Having discussions with businesses and such that have questions regarding the guidance, or also we get complaints. So when we go out, when we have somebody go out on complaints about a particular business or a group of people not following the governor's or the director of health's orders, we have to have somebody be able to go out and typically, in most cases, they're going out educating the business or the group of people and saying, hey, that you're not interpreting this right. You need to do this slightly differently in order to come into compliance, that type of thing. And then kind of our third area. So the first was the biosurveillance, the contact tracing and case monitoring piece. Second one was enforcement, again, using that term fairly loosely there. And then our third rung is COVID mitigation and planning efforts. One of the things that we have to do is we have to be able to prepare for case and or contact spikes. Again, with what the governor released today for everybody to know is all staff at long-term care facilities are now going to be required to be tested. So we are going to start seeing additional cases. There will be additional contacts there, but we're also supposed to be helping with the with making the arrangements, helping out with some of the testing, some of the follow-up, a lot of the guidance being provided to them. Also looking at preparation for potential mass vaccination campaigns. Very similar to H1N1. I think we had discussed that at least in committee. These are things that we're trying to prep and plan for, and those types of things. So, you know, when the funding was passed as part of contact tracing, yes, that's something that we're looking at. However, there are some, not many, but there are some designated funds that we're starting to write for that will help take care of some of that aspect, potentially not all of it, but a large chunk of it. Some of the other aspects, the full enforcement piece, the mitigation planning efforts, there's not quite enough there, and there's just not those designated streams. And we don't want to move forward and utilize any of the funds that were provided to us without making sure that members of council are aware of kind of where we're looking at needing those funds. Again, because a lot of the conversations that were had by council, that using that term contact tracing and really discussing that aspect of the response a lot, I don't want it to be misconstrued. So I want to make sure that if some of the things that I have brought to you today, you know, looking at the biosurveillance, the enforcement, and the mitigation and planning efforts, if that is not where you see those funds being able to be utilized that you had allocated to us for those kind of purposes, please tell us, and we will not utilize them for those purposes.
Mr. President, if I may ask a question, let Trish get a chance to take a breath. How much, Tammy had mentioned about $10,000 for contact tracing. Could we clarify, you have not received that, but those funds are available, correct?
The dollar amount, yes, it's $11,205 is what we would be eligible for from the state but we still have to write for it and receive it.
Okay, so I just want to make that clear. Yeah, I just want to make it clear. It's not as though those funds have been received, and so
No.
there's. Okay,
And
so
those
may
we
I-
do
let me-
have to spend it in order to get it. It's a reimbursement grant.
Well, that'd be a good thing for you in 2021. The other thing I wanted to say, Mr. President, to the council in general, is if you recall the conversation 2 weeks ago, this issue generally was talked about. The money is going to the health department. It was pretty clear, I think, unanimous vote, and pretty clear from the administration whose suggestion it was to bring to council that that money should go to primarily to contact tracing. I also said that there is no way once that money goes to your account that it's really up to your board. And that what I would hope, what the mayor's office is going to do, and what I would hope council does is, and you use the term transparency, that's good to hear. I think we're going to want to see the transparency that shows us where these $50,000 went. And so that's really all that was ever said. Things got kind of carried away, perhaps at committee. You were never restricted. Now, if you're asking, I'll make one more comment. If you're asking for our opinion, I don't know why is this on black, man. If I was asking our opinion, I would say enforcement is not something that I'm particularly interested in, and I would be surprised if the state didn't push out money, make money available to the port, or excuse me, to the health department to receive some help with enforcement. But the things you mentioned, I think mass vaccination is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Maybe we're talking about 2021, but the rest of that stuff, I think that's what you're required to do to respond. But I'm really unclear on how as you say, the enforcement piece would fit in, and so I've got some reservations about that. And so, it's really for contact tracing for infected persons and their family and contacts. It really wasn't understood. At least I really wasn't crazy about dedicating a lot of money to enforcement. So at the end of the year, we'll see if it was heavy on enforcement, and council and administration can take that into account when we fashion our 2021 COVID response.
I think in talking to Mrs. Earlston this afternoon, her concern is, like you said, transparency. She wanted the rest of the council to be aware that there was a grant received, federal grant, and this money would be put towards coronavirus pandemic.
Carl, my point is there wasn't a grant received. Trish will apply for a grant of $11,205.
Right.
But that money's not been received. The other part about it is you have to expense it out to get it back. So it really is a pretty good idea that council put that $50,000 up, because now there are additional funds with which they can expense and then be reimbursed. So it's not the case that they've received the money, Mr. President.
Any questions from the other council members regarding this?
Trish, are you planning on applying for that grant, or if the money that the city gave you can only be used specifically for that contact tracing, then will you not apply for the 10,000, 11,000 grant?
No, we're still going to apply for it. I mean, it's like with many other grants, and Phil can attest to this. It's a lot of background work. It's and everything like that. But it's work that we do, and if it's dollars that are out there, I'm going to get those grant dollars. I'm not going to just charge it off to the city. That makes no sense.
Well, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't make any sense.
There's a grant. I'm going to take that grant and I'm going to utilize that. And at least with those dollars, I'm not going to need to necessarily go to council and say, hey, I need $11,205. And you guys
already got it.
You already
got it for contact tracing.
Come out of that. Exactly.
So you already got the $50,000. when you apply for and receive the grant and you can demonstrate that you've spent that money, then they will send you the $11,000. That money then will stay in your fund. I think it's a pretty good deal.
Yep. Absolutely.
No one said 2 weeks ago. No one said anywhere along the line since the idea was dreamt up to utilize these funds to be proactive instead of wait on the state. No one said that you couldn't use them for other purposes. It was, and I said, I'm not crazy about enforcement. I don't think that's really, there's going to be plenty of contact tracing work. We need to have resources there. So if there is a surge, you can respond to it quickly, but
Tom, I think that was understood.
Did that in the ordinance that you all passed. No one restricted the uses.
And I think that was understood. And like Carl and I were saying, and Trish and I in discussion were both saying that we felt that way. We felt that that was kind of understood, that it wasn't just cut and dry. It can only be used for this. But in, just wanting to be upfront and transparent, we wanted to kind of share with the rest of council, hey, we're looking at possibly doing some of these things too, that could just kind of help the health department out a little bit in some other areas. So, I think we're in agreement on that, it wasn't just this is all it could be used for. I think it was just a matter of wanting to let council know, hey, there are some additional funds out there we're going to try and get that could really help us more with that tracing, which then would maybe open up some of the money to be used in some other ways to help us out. So I think that's really all this is just a way of letting council know, what we're thinking about doing.
Absolutely. And after the beginning of the state's fiscal year, so after July 1, we've already been told that the state is working on going back to their controlling board to seek out some additional funds. So again, while council allotted that 50,000, we're still going to do our due diligence to continue to search out grant funds and everything like that to cover and make that back up. Still working on it.
Mr. President.
Yes.
I just have one question, that whatever you use the 50,000 for, you are keeping track of, and we will know what you're using that money for.
Oh yeah. Yep. Even in time, if it is any of our staff's time, we have a tracking system down to 15-minute increments in terms of what our staff are doing, what programs they're working in, and what type of activities. So we can pull reports even down to that. Absolutely.
Anything else? Okay, I think it was a good discussion bringing this out. There should be any question here as to the whole thing now, but okay, moving on to elected officials, Auditor Trish, anything?
No, I'm just looking forward to the utility meeting and next month finance meeting. We're pretty solid still, and I'll let the mayor, if he has any comments on the finances, to take it from there. It's a hot night, about time to end the meeting.
Okay, is Treasurer Sparks with us at all?
Yeah.
Yes? No?
I really don't have any.
There you go.
Do you have me unmuted?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
you're not. You're ready to go.
Okay, I was just wondering. The only thing I had is I was listening to the radio, and Mansfield had exactly the same thing. They were off 1% off a budget. I just thought it was kind of funny from the last meeting. So just to let you know, so most of the cities are probably in the same boat. I don't know if that's the case, but just wanted to let you know that. And I don't have anything else.
Okay. Thank you. Law Director Palmer.
Nothing specifically tonight, other than if you've got questions or there's things going on, just come on in the office. Mike and I had a nice talk this morning, and I'm happy to talk to any of you anytime.
Okay, thank you. Mayor.
You're muted, Tom.
You're muted.
Are you there? Am I there?
Yes, you're there. Doug.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for that. First of all, I wanted to indirectly apologize to Mark. There was he had participated, I think it's been almost 2 weeks ago now, a meeting with the Port Authority, and it was a sort of a nasty exchange. So I want to apologize in front of the group for that. Most of the nastiness was in a private call afterwards, but I did want to mention that and appreciate your votes, Mark, on all the relevant stuff. So I'll start there. The other thing I wanted to point out real quickly is that that sometimes the grants that come into the city are highlighted, and other times they're not mentioned at all. And so with 2020 36, there's almost $1 million worth of state funds in the Harding Way project. So I did want to point that out. And then I wanted to heap a little bit more praise and credit on our fire chief. If we're successful, that's $700,000 of grant money coming in the community. So I know that's important. So that's $1 million worth of paving this year, and then over a 3-year period, we hope that we get 700,000. So I did want to mention that. And there's I think that's an important equation, but it's definitely a big part of our paving. Beyond that, I want to mention that the state legislation that is relevant to us, meaning that involves the local communities getting their CARES Act money. It is still in House committee, so that is frustrating. If you get a chance to drop an email or a note to either of our state legislators, or perhaps even State Senator nominee, I guess he's not elect, Bill Reineke, all the help we can get to free that up would be real important. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 180,000. There's a lot of good things we can do in terms of public health and COVID response if we could get those dollars freed up. Gosh, beyond that, that's probably all I have, unless there's a question.
Can you bring us up to date on the progress of Charles Street?
Yeah, that won't take long, Carl.
Okay.
What we started this morning on, and the progress, long on progress, a lot of explanations. And so it's not going well at all. The best thing I can say about it, as we touch base with some of our customers, residents, and businesses out there, to make sure that they haven't reached their breaking point, or their pressure of being difficult to get to has not gotten to them. But it's going real slow. That the most recent date is the end of June. That's what they're committing to. That's not acceptable. And so we'll be working on that this week with the contractor, trying to identify a quicker pathway. Maybe on the upside, the bike path seems to be moving along pretty well. And if you're out there by the Harding Way, Portland Way intersection, you can see that our paver has a lot of equipment mobilized, and they're doing some commercial paving there in and around the site. But I think they're getting ready to hit that pretty heavy over the next couple of weeks, weather permitting. So that and there's a lot of interest. I'm not a social media, I'm sort of a voyeur, but there's a lot of commentary and talk about the bike path, expectations, excitement about it. And so we're kind of getting excited here at City Hall. But I think that's plenty. Like Brian said, it's a hot night.
It was nice that Matt sent out a view of the bike path too. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's the best way not to get in trouble for trespassing, is just to have a virtual tour. But I do know there are people whose curiosity is getting the best of them.
Okay. And one other question I had this morning when talking with you, maybe anything you wanted to bring up about the park and Splash Park, June 6th?
It's real frustrating. I think we summarized last night. So there's a good videotape, or I don't even know quite what it's called, that Andy Wiltenthaler did that summarized some of the operational changes and what to expect. We're surprised and I think excited about the fact that we can get this thing going. I said last night, I'll repeat myself, I was really thinking it'd be July 1st before we'd be opened up to have the pools open. So I know there's a lot of hustling going on between now and the end of next week to get ready, but unless something goofy in a bad way happens, we'll be ready to open up on the 6th. So pools and splash park and the playgrounds. I don't know if, Trish, I don't think she can. You almost have to be clairvoyant to read the minds of the playground committee and the working group that's working on getting us some direction on when public playgrounds can be open. But I don't have much more to offer other than we're all tapping our foot and getting impatient. We will have safety protocols to answer the question. We'll have safety protocols. I use that word tongue in cheek, but we'll have sanitizer and have a routine around which we'll have regularized cleaning of the playground equipment. If people are real cautious about having their kids exposed, that's probably not the first place you want to go the first day that it's allowed to be open for the public. You may want to allow us to work out some of those bugs, but I think we'll use sort of the social policing, and then we'll staff to make sure we have people down there cleaning if there is some sort of some family in particular that shows up and seems to exhibit a lot of symptoms.
One more question.
Yeah.
19 is up to the city limits. Is the 19 to Bizarres done now?
No, they are working on that, and I was going to mention that'll really dovetail nicely. Where you see that ending out by Evans Drive, that's where our project will pick up. And gosh, I bet sometime in August, everyone, we'll have the mixed blessing of inconvenience by paving, but it'll be great to get it done. As I drive uptown every day, the main uptown section of Harding Way, we're not getting that replaced a moment too soon.
Right. Okay, that's it?
Yeah, that's all. Thanks. I appreciate the votes and getting a lot of work done tonight.
Okay. My only comments was questions to the mayor. So if we don't have anything, to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Triplett made the motion, seconded by Mrs. Earlston. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All in favor, opposed, likewise. Meeting adjourned at 8:18.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Birthday, Aaron. Happy birthday, Aaron.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.